Book 3, Chapter 14 of The Cinema Murder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Chris Jones. The Cinema Murder by E. Phillips Oppenheim. Book 3, Chapter 14. The close of the performance left them both curiously tongue-tied. They waited until the theater was half empty before they left their seats. Then they joined the little throng of stragglers at the end. "Your play," she murmured as they faced the soft night air. "I can't believe it even now. We've seen it together. Your play, and this is New York. That's a new ending, isn't it?" "Absolutely," he confessed. "The ending was always what bothered me, you know." She laughed, not quite naturally. She was unexpectedly impressed. "So you're a genius, after all," she went on. "Sometimes I wondered, but never mind that now. Philip, do you know I am starving? We took exactly 10 minutes over dinner." He led her to a huge restaurant a few doors away, where they found a corner table. Up in the balcony an orchestra was playing light music, and a little crowd of people were all the time streaming through the doors. Beatrice settled herself down with an air of content. Few of the people were in evening dress, and the tone of the place was essentially democratic. Philip, who had learnt a little about American dishes, gave an order, and Beatrice sipped her cocktail with an air of growing appreciation. "Queer idea, this, but the stuff tastes all right," she acknowledged. "I suppose if you were taking your dear Miss Dalston out, you'd go to a different sort of place, eh?" "We generally go further uptown," he admitted unthinkingly. She set her glass down quickly. "So you do take her out, do you?" she asked coldly. "You'd have been with her tonight, perhaps, if I hadn't been here?" "Very likely." She was half inclined to rally him, behind it all a little annoyed. "You're a nice sort of person. Why, it's only been a few months ago since you pretended to be in love with me." He looked at her, and her eyes fell before his. "I don't think there was ever much question of our being in love with one another, was there? We simply seemed to have drifted together because we were both miserable. And then, as the time passed on, well, you came to be my only solace against the wretchedness of that life." She nodded appreciatively. For a moment the sights and sounds of the noisy restaurant passed from her consciousness. "Do you remember how glad I was to see you? How we used to spend our holidays in those dingy fields and hope and pray for better things some day? But it was all so hopeless, wasn't it? You could barely keep yourself from starving. And oh, the misery of that awful Denton Magna and teaching those wretched children. There were never such children in the world. I couldn't get their mothers to send them clean. They seemed to have inherited all the vice, the bad language, the ugly sordidness with which the place reeked. They were old men and women in wickedness before they passed the first standard. It's a corner of the world I never want to see again. I'd rather find hell. Have you ordered any wine, Philip? I want to forget." He pointed to the bottle which stood in the pail by their side, and summoned a waiter. She watched it being opened and their glasses filled. "This is like one of our fairy stories of the old days, isn't it?" she said. "Well, I drink to you, Philip. Here's success to our new lives." She raised her glass and drained it. A woman had entered who reminded him of Elizabeth, and his eyes had wandered away for a moment as Beatrice pledged him. She called him back a little impatiently. "Don't sit there as though you were looking at ghosts, Philip. Try and remember who I am and what we used to mean to one another. Let us try and believe," she added a little wistfully, "that one of those dreams of ours which we used to set floating like bubbles has come true. We can wipe out all the memories we don't want. That ought to be easy." "Ought it?" he answered grimly. "There are times when I've found it difficult enough." She laughed and looked about her. He realized suddenly that she was still very attractive, with her rather insolent mouth, her clear eyes, her silky hair with a little fringe. People, as they passed, paid her some attention, and she was frankly curious about everybody. "Well," she went on presently, "thank heavens I have plenty of willpower. I remember nothing, absolutely nothing which happened before this evening. I am going to tell myself that an uncle in Australia has died and left me money, and so we are here in New York to spend it. Tomorrow I am going to begin. I shall buy clothes, all sorts of clothes, and hats. You won't know me tomorrow evening, Philip." His heart sank. Tomorrow evening. "But Beatrice," he expostulated, "you don't think of staying here, do you? You don't know a soul. You haven't a friend in the city." "What friends have I in England?" she retorted. "Not one. I may just as well start a new life in a new country. It seems bright enough here, and gay. I like it. I shall move to a different sort of hotel tomorrow. You must help me choose one. And as to friends," she whispered, looking up at him with a little provocative gleam in her eyes, "don't you count? Can't you do what I'm going to do, Philip? Can't you draw down that curtain?" He shivered. "I can't," he muttered. A waiter brought their first course, and she at once evinced interest in her food. She returned to the subject, however, later on, after she had drunk another glass of wine. "You're a silly old thing, you know," she declared. "You found the courage somehow to break away from that loathsome existence. You had more courage even than I, because you ran a risk I never did. But here you are, free, with the whole world before you, and your last danger disappearing with the knowledge that I am ready to be your friend, and am sensible about everything that has happened. This ought to be an immense relief to you, Philip. You ought to be the happiest man on earth. And there you sit, looking like a death's head. Look at me for a moment like a human being, can't you? Drink some more wine. There must be some strength, some manhood about you somewhere, or you couldn't have done what you have done." He filled his glass mechanically. She leaned across the table. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks delicately pink. "Courage, Philip," she murmured. "Remember that what you did, well, in a way it was for my sake, wasn't it? For love of me. I am here now, and we are both free. The old days are past. Even their shadow cannot trouble us any longer. Don't be a sentimentalist. Listen, and I'll tell you something. At the bottom of my heart, I rather admire you for what you did. Don't you want your reward?" "No," he answered firmly. "I don't." She shrugged her shoulders and kept time with her foot to the music. Across